Hello, guys, and welcome back to another episode of Life Unscripted. I just said how I keep still thinking to say hashtag no filter, but it is Life Unscripted. And I'm very, very excited because my guest is a dear friend of mine, someone who's been on the podcast multiple times. I've been on her podcast, and her name is Laura Max Rose. Welcome, Laura.
I'm so honored to be with you today. Julie, thank you for having me on.
Of course, I'm so excited to have you on. It's funny, Laura and I have said this a lot. We used to both live in Houston, and whenever we would get together for happy hours or what breakfast, whatever we were doing, we just always had these incredible conversations, and we've had this connection since the day we met. And I feel like we've said in the past, or at least I've thought it, that sometimes I wish we could have recorded some of those conversations because we get so into it.
I know that's how long ago was that, by the way, when we first met? I think we're talking like a decade at this point.
Oh, at least I was going to say, because I moved to Houston in like 2012. I probably met you by 2013. I mean,
It was an
crazy.
instant connection. And even when you leave me voice notes on my phone, Julie, I'm like, gosh, I'm so glad this woman has a podcast because you have such an amazing voice. You sound like you're hosting a podcast when you leave me a voice note. And I love it.
As do you, as do you. And we say that a
Well,
lot. And
thank
Laura
you.
also has a podcast, which I'll link to. I'm sure a lot of you already know about it. But there are like so many topics we could talk about. And when Laura's like, so are we going to talk about anything specific? I'm like, there's so much I want to talk about with you in like 30, 45 minutes. But one of the things that's been coming up for me, and I had mentioned it to Laura before starting to record, and I want to hear her experience with it, is self-doubt. And when self-doubt creeps in, whether that's by way of a career situation, a romantic relationship, maybe a parent-child relationship, friendships, family, talk to me a little bit about in your life when you've had some moments of self-doubt. You don't have to give details, and how you've overcome that.
Oh, what a great question. And first off, I just want to say that anyone who tells you they've never struggled with self-doubt is lying or not aware of the fact that they've struggled with
Mm-hmm.
self-doubt. I think self-doubt is part of the process of being a human being.
Mm-hmm.
And what self-doubt is, I believe, is this sort of moment where we're asked to really test our faith muscles and test our muscles of belief in ourselves when it feels like there's no evidence to support what we want and the fact that we might get it. And there are going to be times in life where everything is adding up and everything makes sense and things are blowing and going. And there are going to be other times where you feel more disconnected. And that is the time where we flex our muscles. That's the time where we work hard. That's the time where we build up our strength for later on when we really need it. And it can feel, I think, very bewildering to be in a period of self-doubt because you're wondering, A, when is this going to end? B, what am I doing with my life? Whatever it is that you're questioning. And C, like, why is this happening to me right now? And what is the purpose of all this? But I think what it's really important to remember when you are feeling self-doubt is you're not a mistake. You're here for a reason. And when the world and the bigger picture feels like too big, what is one small thing that you can do just for today? Can you break it down into small pieces? Can you live
Mm-hmm.
one day at a time? Can you live 1 hour at a time if one day feels too long?
Mm-hmm.
And eventually you're going to look back and things are going to make a lot more sense than they do now.
So you should be a therapist, and I know
Oh my
I've told you
God.
that before.
Well, you just came up with that question. Like I
No,
asked you yesterday if you had any questions and you just asked me that. And I'm like, well, shit, Julie, I don't
I'm like,
know.
because I'm like selfishly thinking about my own life right now. No, that was really like such an eloquent way to put that, and honestly, it like speaks to my soul. And what I find so interesting is, right, like we whether we go to therapy, or we don't go to therapy, we read the books or we listen to the audiobooks or whatever we're doing, until the situation arises where you need to use those tools that you've been trying to, add to your toolbox and keep it, you don't have to, sorry about that, you don't have to use them until you're tested with it. So you're actually not practicing all the time, because it's not like the trigger or the thing is happening all the time. So then when you're faced with it, for me, it's very easy. 1 second, I'm just going to X out of my notifications that I didn't do. Okay, it might happen again, whatever. And then when you're tested with it, and in that moment, it's very easy to go back to old ways and old patterns. So when you said the thing like that, you practice, or when the moment happens, and that's when you're kind of tested to think a certain way or do a certain thing, and then over time, you're able to really utilize it when you're dealing with a bigger challenge. That spoke to me, but it's
You're
hard.
reminding Well, you're reminding me as you're talking that I have been faced with self-doubt typically when something comes up in my life that I wasn't expecting, or that I at least wasn't expecting to set me back. And two of the examples that popped into my head were when we moved here. It was such a grand adventure, and we moved during the pandemic, but I was not prepared for how small of a town we were moving to and how different my life was about to become. And I really had moments that entire first year. Somebody told me right before we moved, Laura, it's going to take you 2 years. The first year is when you're going to settle in, when you're going to make a home for yourself. And the second is when you're going to find your friends. And I'm so grateful somebody said that to me, because otherwise I would have just been so bewildered my first year, because I really didn't meet that many people that were like the people that I have in my life today.
Mhm.
And I started to think like maybe I'm just not going to have that many friends. And if you know me, like I'm not this super extreme extrovert, but I'm definitely extroverted. Like on the Myers-Briggs, I'm 51% extroverted. And that seems like a very good way of explaining it. And I can do alone. I can do solitude. I live in the mountains and I love it, but I missed people and I was really afraid. Like, is this what it's always going to be like? Was this the
Mhm.
right choice for me? And what's really amazing, Julie, is that, my friend was right. In year two, I ended up meeting the people who are now friends that feel like family.
Mhm.
And I was in this place of transition and feeling like the woman that I was when we were in Houston, the woman that I left behind, was a better version of me. And that is one of the hardest parts, I think, of being in
Yeah.
transition, is questioning, was I better before? And
Right.
now I look back and I'm like, oh my God, I'm like 10 times that woman because of how much I've grown. And I didn't know
Right.
what was going on in my life, right? But like the everything that was happening for me was in my best interest. And the same
Right.
thing has happened for me when I have babies. I end up having to
Mhm.
take a step back from work. It always feels really counterintuitive for me. I
Mhm.
feel stuck. I feel like I'm stopping. I don't want to move so slowly.
Yeah.
But then, I end up with this amazing kid and things do get
Right.
back on track,
They worked. My friend the other day, we were texting or voice noting about something, and she was like, "You have to surrender. Like you have to surrender to." I don't want to get into the exact specifics, but we were talking a lot about like surrendering and just trusting. Like what's going to be is going to be. What's not going to be is not going to be. No matter how hard you try to manipulate the situation, and it's so much easier said than done. But I feel like once you can accept that and of course have the positive mindset and all the things, but yeah, I mean, you moved, in those moments when you were like, oh, I haven't found my friend group yet, or I haven't, or oh, I don't know about this, or is this maybe not the right move? What did you do to get through those moments? Was it like minute by minute, like minute to minute, where you just kind of took a deep breath?
In some cases, so what I kept looking
Hmm.
back on was, for me, I don't believe in accidents. I don't believe in
Hmm.
coincidences. I kept looking at our journey to Colorado. I kept on looking at the way the pieces fit together. I kept on looking at how many times I just said, like, please, if this isn't meant to be, let's just end it
Hmm.
now. I don't want to go through this whole move just to find out we didn't go to the right place. I kept on just trying to recall all of the things that happened to bring us there. And
Yeah.
I just tried to remember that that wasn't a mistake. It couldn't have been a mistake. And I also like I think there were moments for me, Julie, where I was like, maybe this is like my life just kind of got a little bit worse. And maybe I'm just going to have to figure out how to adjust to that. That wasn't what I was
Mhm.
anticipating. But eventually, I've always been a fighter. I've always fought for the best life that I can possibly create for myself. I'm not really comfortable being unhappy or being unsettled. And I think I
Mhm.
just really fought very hard to find my friends, to find my people. But it was hard work. And I think there are so many messages out there. Like if you want to, you can find a lot of messages telling you to push harder and
Mhm.
telling you like just keep trying to get the thing that you really want. But what you were just saying is so important. Sometimes it's really not about doing that. Sometimes it's really about surrendering to
Like,
what
yeah.
yeah, to what the universe
Uh,
really wants for you, and
right.
that is often a lot better than what you want for yourself, but you have to surrender to it,
Yeah.
and that
It's
requires letting
hard.
go of control. Yes, it's very hard.
Right, and then it's like when you let go of the control, so you no longer have the control. Obviously, that can rev up anxiety and all these things. But it's something I've also been focusing on. And it's kind of like what we're talking about is focusing on the things you can control. focus on those things. Like that's where you put your energy. But the things that you literally have zero control over, it's a waste of time, energy, brain space. Like I'm preaching to the fucking choir. I said I wasn't going to curse as much on this podcast. But I'm preaching
Okay.
to the choir being myself. Like, so yeah, to your point, sometimes you need to try and you have to do things. And, of course, growth isn't always linear and whatever, but sometimes take your foot off the gas, right? And
Yes.
just let it be.
Yes, and
Hard.
I think if you really it's so hard, and I think if you really listen to yourself, you'll know when those moments are that you need to push a little harder and, like, kinda get
Yeah.
yourself out of bed or get yourself to the next stage, and know when it
Mm,
is that, like, you gotta let go and, like, stop trying to fit
yeah.
a square peg into a round hole,
Right.
right?
Right. You
So
can't. And
tell
yesterday,
me.
was it yesterday? Well, yeah, no, I was going to say, I don't, this podcast isn't coming out tomorrow, so the yesterday won't make sense. But as we're speaking, yesterday was one of those days I just felt blah. Like I didn't, it wasn't that I couldn't get out of bed or like really didn't want to. Like I ended up getting out of bed and it was all good. But I noticed I took myself on a walk in like 100-degree heat. I'm crazy. And I felt so much better. Like I needed to like switch up something or get out of my own head. I'm always in my own damn way, you know?
When you think about
But
what it is that's
yeah,
making you feel blah, what is that thing? Like, is there something going on that you wanna share at
it's
least?
it's hard. I mean, yeah, nothing like it's gonna sound so dramatic. No, not necessarily a specific thing, but I think what's happened actually, speaking of like, I was just like growth isn't linear. I would say within the last year, probably since my breakup, not since my divorce, but since my breakup, the guy a couple years ago, whatever, I have been on this like, not to be cheesy, but this like path, this like oh my God, this is so cheesy, but like journey of self-discovery, like figuring out like really who I am. But while figuring it out, I'm not liking some parts of myself a lot. And that's what's hard because I'm like, well, this is how I've been for 38 years. And now I have to like rewire my brain. Like, so it's just like I'm kind of like having an internal struggle. I'm reading the book Atomic Habits. I'm sure you've read it 10
You know
times or
what's
you
funny,
know.
Julie, is I haven't read it and I've just kind of done the cliff notes. I know. I
It's,
know. I did an
I
interview
mean,
on my podcast about it, but I haven't
you
read
did?
it. Yes, there's an
I have
interview
to
about
check.
atomic habits with my friend who's a researcher. It's really fantastic. And I've learned
Oh,
so much from that book, but I haven't read it directly. But
oh
I'll
my
tell you
God.
what I tell my almost 8-year-old daughter.
Yeah.
She is an extremely self-reflective human being, especially for someone
Oh,
who's not even 8. And when she notices something about herself that she doesn't like, she really wants to change it, which is really admirable for somebody that age. That's like a very
mm,
adult way of looking at things.
yeah.
And one of the things I tell her when she's kind of in this state of like, oh my God, I don't like this thing. I'm not talking about her not liking her hair color. I'm talking about
Right.
like, hey, I don't really like that say these things to this type of person or whatever it is,
Yeah.
that I said this to my teacher today. Um, I always say, in life, I believe there's sort of 3 phases to changing our behavior. One is the first one's awareness, and you're in that. And the second
Hmm.
one is acceptance. The third one is action. So a lot of us jump from like awareness to action. We see these
Hmm.
things about ourselves that we don't like. And then we're like, well, I need to fix this right now. I don't like me. I don't like this part of
Hmm.
myself. But when we try to change from a place of self loathing, it never works. I
Right.
think we need to really, even if you want to like write a letter of gratitude to your bad habit, whatever, if we want to call it a bad
Hmm.
habit, for
Sure.
whatever it is it's given you, because Julie, you've held on to these things for some reason, right? They served you at one point. I believe that
Sure.
about the things I do that I don't really
Sure.
like. And say thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you for your help when I was 6. Thank you for your help when I
Right.
was 13. Thank you, manipulation, for helping me get out of a bad
Right.
situation when I was
Yeah.
15. Whatever it is, now it's time for me to let you go.
I love that. I love that. And does your daughter do this? Like, does she process? I mean, she's 8, but
I feel like she's starting to understand that like this sort of like it's this way of just like seeing something and then wanting to
yeah.
fix it right away is not working. And so she's very
Right.
interested in like sort of another route. And I think the idea of self-acceptance is like a very big theme at the moment,
Mhm.
really for both
Mhm.
of us.
Mhm.
Because I'm like growing up right now. I mean, I'm 35 years old. I'm not 90. Like I'm
Yeah.
learning every day, and parenting is a big
No.
teacher. So
I mean,
uh,
that's everything. I mean, you're learning
I'm like,
right. There's
yeah.
no rule
So
book. There's no handbook on parenting. You weren't handed
no,
something when you had your first baby. Like, so I mean,
exactly.
you're figuring out as you go, and that's really something I read somewhere like, give your parents like a little slack or a little grace or whatever because this is their first time around too.
Oh
Like
my God.
being a parent, you know?
Especially with your
So
first kid. It's like,
I can only imagine. Like
yeah.
you're doing what, but mother's intuition and intuition in general, you're doing what you feel is best for your kid, and that is what's best for your kid. I think. I'm not a parent, but I imagine.
And I just want to say, like, Julie, I think it is amazing that you are like, you've read this book and like you're having these awarenesses about yourself. Obviously, I don't know specifically what they are,
Right,
but
right.
that is like a really, really, really noble thing. And like, it really deserves acknowledging. A lot of people
Oh,
don't ever
thank you.
do that.
I mean, there are a lot of people I know that have never gone to therapy, and
Yeah.
because they're
Yeah.
anti-therapy, and I'm like, why? Like, what's going on here? We need to study your brain. No, I appreciate you saying that. And I think, I think a lot of it comes to, and maybe you've noticed this, like, have you always been one to not care what people think? Would you say you are now a person who doesn't care what people think? And if there was ever a time where that changed, when and how? Like
I
in your
don't think
life?
there's anyone on the planet who doesn't care what other people think. Yeah. I just think there's people who care more than other people. And I
Mhm.
always cared a lot. And I have a daughter
Yeah.
who cares a lot. And I wish I could just wrap my arms around her and take that away, but I can't. So I get to watch her do a lot of the things that I did at that
Yeah.
age because I cared so much. And a lot of my life growing up has been about letting that go. I'm always going to care to a degree, but I do care a lot less. I felt like my previous podcast. So I had a podcast, Look Ma
Hmm.
No Hands. It was a parenting
Hmm.
podcast. Then I started another one recently. It is really, I'd be very curious to like kind of listen to an episode from that versus one now because I'm just so much more honest about how I feel about things. I'm not as
Hmm.
afraid of people hating me. And I think that
Hmm.
that just comes with evolution and
Yes.
age in a lot of
Age.
ways.
Yeah, I was going to say, and I think, and life experience and all of it, but I think, like, of course, like you said, everyone cares what someone think, what people think on some level. Like, I think you're lying. You probably are lying to yourself or others. Like, who doesn't care? Why do we get stressed? Why do we,
Right.
right?
Of
Like,
course.
So,
Yeah.
but I think it's a matter of like, caring, like you said, caring less. And something I read so many times, we all have, is like, no one actually cares about you. Like you're thinking about them thinking about you way more than they're thinking about you. Like they actually don't care that, and then on that similar note, the idea of if someone, what was it? Like when someone's projecting something, right? That has nothing to do with you personally. And that's something I've been working on through different relationships in my life. Like just because so and so is saying something maybe negative about my situation or whatever, that has actually nothing to do with me, right? Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. It's about how
Yeah.
they view you through the lens of their
Yes.
own
Yes.
experiences.
Yes.
Yeah,
But
and the
it's
role
hard
that you
to,
play for them.
yes, and maybe it's a jealousy or an insecurity, or their own shit. Like, and I have empathy for those people, but that's a big thing. I've been like, you know what, that person, like, I have empathy for that person, and I wish that person well. Like,
Yeah.
good riddance to you. But
Yeah.
that idea. So you're one of the most authentic people I
I
know.
have a
You
nose
are
itch.
definitely like,
Sorry.
there
Hold
you
on.
go. Doesn't that mean something when there's an it? Is that, what does that mean?
I don't
That means something. Like I
what
should.
I don't it's like a tickle. Okay. I'm
It's
done.
but sometimes when you get like, I don't know, I know you believe in
Maybe.
signs. I feel like it's something.
All right, sorry. Start over. I apologize.
No, you're fine. Where was I? No. Oh, I look at you as one of the most authentic people I know. You are who you are on your podcast, on your Instagram, in real life. Like from my experience, you are so incredibly authentic. Has that been something that's been just kind of innately how you've been since you can remember, or talk a little about that?
Absolutely not. Thank you so much for the compliment. And when I was 16 years old, I actually didn't go to therapy for the first time at 16. I was younger, but it was the first time I had requested to go to therapy. And I sat down in my therapist's office and I told him this spectacular story about my life and how fabulous it was. This narrative that I'd kind of sold myself on, which was very interesting because I was in his office because I was having a lot of problems.
Hmm.
And, my parents had gotten divorced 3 years prior. Um, my father struggled with alcoholism. I was an only
Hmm.
child. I had a front row seat to that. It was very traumatizing and I didn't know how to process any of that because all of the adults around me were sort of telling me to like put it in my back pocket and move on with my life. And so
Mhm.
what ended up happening, Julie, was that I had so much built up that I became very, very, very numb to even the really wonderful things in my life. And at 16 years old, I noticed that and it terrified me. And I
Mm.
will never forget like sitting in my room at 16 and having this awareness that I didn't remember. And this is how I described it. I didn't remember the last time I heard somebody say, I love you. Like I knew somebody had said it to me. I knew my mom said it to me every day. People hugged me all the time, but I hadn't felt it. And I wasn't feeling anything anymore. And I was a very like naturally positive, happy human from the moment I was born. So it was really, really frightening to me. And I asked my mom to get help. And so I went to this therapist and even though I asked for this appointment, I was like, I'm going
Right.
to convince this person that I am perfect. And that was what I really wanted to do at that age. I wanted everyone really, really, really to like me. And I told him this hour-long story like, yes, my parents got divorced. Yes, this thing happened with my father. Yes, I moved halfway across the country, but I'm a really strong person and I'm great and I do all these really great things. And the whole time I'm talking, I'm kind of holding on to just not breaking down. And he responds and
Yeah.
he goes, well, that all sounds like it sucks. And
Oh gosh.
I was like, huh? And I'd never had anyone say that to me. Like I had been to therapists before and they were like, you're so amazing. And how do you have such a great attitude? And I kind of felt like
Mhm.
I'd fooled all of them. And I started to cry. And I
Mm.
said, what do you mean? And he said, why don't you tell me the real story? And I just couldn't stop crying. And he
Oh,
said, so there's this person that you have been like basically pretending to be because you have to in order to survive. And then there's you, and she's right here. And there's this girl who is like 6 years old and she's kind of still frozen there and she's inside of you and you haven't been able to, she hasn't been safe like to have any of her feelings. And then there's 16-year-old you. And what we're going to do is we're going to integrate those two people. And at that time, like integration was not something people were talking about yet. Like now we
right.
describe like a good like dating candidate as like he's
Right.
well integrated. And I'm like, what the? Like nobody was talking
Like, what does
about
this
this.
mean?
What is
Right.
this? And so he
Right.
started to talk to me about authenticity. And I was like, I want that. I want to feel the way I do in this office in my real life. And I will tell you, Julie, I went off to college and I went back into a lot of my sort of inauthentic
Mhm.
patterns and I was really, really miserable. Like you don't just hit rock bottom once, like you kind of come back to it.
Yep.
Um, I sort of think of it as like in the process of like recovery from an addiction. They talk about like
Yeah.
relapse as part of recovery. For
The
me,
road to
like going
recovery.
back, yeah, going back to these behaviors is part of recovery. It's part of
Yeah.
growth. And I absolutely went back to them. And I feel like I just am wildly uncomfortable being anybody other than who I am because I know how it feels to be me. And
Wow.
I just don't have any interest in being anybody else.
And
That doesn't mean I'm not tempted, but
sure,
yeah.
sure, but you have no interest in it. I got chills in part of that story, and it's right, like you said, like addiction, like growth is not linear. Like you're going to have moments where you go back to the previous behaviors, and what like that whole thing resonates so beyond much with me because something I've talked to my therapist about, and someone very close to me pointed it out to me. Just like you said, you did great when you moved. Everything was great. Like your life was this like perfect little thing in a perfect little box with a pretty little bow. That's kind of how my life was growing up. And I am so grateful for it, so fortunate for it. But I didn't really have any huge roadblocks until college. And then when I hit that, I didn't have the coping skills or they were lying dormant and I got slapped in that face, like, and then I had to figure it out. So I kind of am was a late bloomer with this emotional maturity stuff. Like, and but it just, but that's why I think I've struggled at times because, like your therapist said to you, well, that sucks. Like, okay, so tell me the real story now. And I've had someone close to me say something similar, and I broke down as well. So I get it.
Yeah, and I think you know what you're saying. You're a late bloomer, and I've had people. I've heard
Yeah.
people say that about themselves before. I think as long as you're blooming, like you're blooming, and
Yes.
we all have our own stories. We all
Yes.
like you're not going to go seek out trauma when you're 13 to make sure you bloom on
Mm,
time. And I don't even think that
mm-mm.
like I don't even think traumatic experiences are necessarily the only thing that's going to create growth. I mean,
Agree.
obviously, challenges do create growth, right? But I think like our each of us has such a unique story. My favorite quote in the entire world, and I feel like I've said it on a conversation, a podcast that we've done before. It's Ellie
Oh,
Wiesel. It's God made man
okay.
because he loves stories. And whenever I'm like struggling with something going on in the world, I always think about all the stories that are going to come out of it. I always think about the
Yeah.
books that are going to be written. And I think we're not all supposed to have the same story. We're supposed to grow at our
Right.
own pace.
Right. I love that. I love that so much. So I want to I'm trying to keep this podcast episode or this podcast in general like slightly shorter, but I just want to keep talking to you, but there are a few kind of questions that don't really have to do with what we were just talking about, but I want to ask you, what would you say in your life has been one of the most unexpected sources of inspiration for you?
Ooh, the first thing that came to my mind was my husband. Yeah,
Oh,
that just popped into my head.
oh, say a little more if you want.
Um, I think there was like obviously when we met, like I don't know, 10 I met him 10 years ago.
Mhm.
He obviously loved me and I loved him, but I think I'm like a million times the person I was because of what he's brought out in me. And like it has been like not what I've expected at all. Like I don't think I thought one of like my favorite sort of analogies for that is that when we met, every single thing in my closet was black. And there's nothing wrong with the fact if you like black clothing, that's fine. But black
Yeah.
really actually doesn't look good on me. It's like not a good color for me at all. And everything was black. And by the time I was moving out of that apartment, when we got engaged about like 11 months after we met, my entire closet was like rainbow. Like it was all these different colors. I just kind of feel like he has pushed me into like core. I would have
Yeah.
been very happy to have had like a much simpler life. Not that there's anything
Hmm.
wrong with simplicity, but I
Of course.
don't think I would have gone to the lengths. I know that I wouldn't have, like, if it weren't
Wow.
for him. And I don't think I was like expecting my like husband to bring that out of me
To be,
in my life.
I love that. It's kind of
So
like I've said this before, I think on a podcast, like, those people that are like, I want a guy who challenges me. And then it's like, yeah, he challenges me. But like, what does that mean? But like, Ben actually challenged you, like not, and I don't mean in like the literal sense necessarily, but like he obviously got you to this place that's inspired you to kind of like grow and everything, and that's what you want.
really, I mean, yeah, I don't feel like you talked about authenticity. Like, I don't really feel like the second I'm lying to myself or anyone else, he's going to be the
Mhm.
first person to notice.
to
And
to call you out.
oh yeah, like I
Yeah.
can't I get things past myself that I don't like feel like I get past him.
Oh
So, I
yeah.
think a lot of people aren't necessarily I think a lot of people don't necessarily want that. Like they
Right.
don't like they kind of like I don't know. I think I was up for that. I was up for that challenge. Like
Yeah.
I wanted somebody to bring
You
that out
want
of
it.
me. That
Right.
same therapist, by the way, I saw him for 2 years and I remember just sobbing in his office and just being very, 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 and it must have been like my, the end of my first year in therapy with him.
Mhm.
It was clearly very intense. And I was, really in touch with just like how deeply unlovable I felt because of how much I'd been through. Like I had so much shame. I can't even like
Mhm.
begin to
Mhm.
describe. Um, I really associated like some of the hard things that happened to me. Like I felt like it was because I had done something wrong. Like there was something wrong with me.
Ah.
And so I was crying and I could barely talk. And I said to him, his name was Greg. I said, Greg, who is going to love all of this? Like, who's going to love me? And my biggest fear was that I wasn't going to ever meet anybody who would love me. Like, that was my core fear.
Right.
And he looked at me and he was just dead still. And he said, someone really good. And I never forgot that. And I
Oh,
met Ben and I remembered that. I'd actually totally forgotten that story. And like, I think a few months ago, I remembered
yeah.
it and I said, yeah, you're someone really good.
Wow. Well,
So,
and that's what
yeah.
it is. It's meeting the person who is going to love you and every part of you, the ugly side, the beautiful side, all of it. And and that's the dream, right? That's what everyone wants. And I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
Ben, like, and then, but it's so like when you said that, I wanted to like cry a little, like when you said, who's going to love all of this? Like, who's like, look, I know I'm a lot, like and some people find it endearing and adorable and love it, and some are like, yeah, this isn't for me. But
Yeah.
it's also holding yourself accountable to the things that you want to change or that could affect the other person. But like you said, there's a lot of shame around that too. Like, but why do I do that? Why do I think that way? Why does that trigger me? Like it's hard. I mean, but You can do it. Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Okay. And now let me ask you, I ask every person this on Life Unscripted, what does living a life unscripted mean to you?
Ooh, being open to going off script, being open to what you didn't plan on and letting it happen and letting it be better than you imagined it would be, I think.
I love that. I love that answer. Well, thank you. Thank you. Before we
Thank
fully go,
you for
can you,
having me
no,
on.
oh my God, I could talk to you for hours and probably we'll do this again. I know we said that on yours too. We're like, we're just going to keep doing this. It's going to be like a
Yes,
series.
please.
Where can people follow you and the name of your new podcast? I know it, but tell everyone all the
Yeah.
things.
Well, thank you so much, Julie. My new podcast is called I Just Have to Say with Laura Max. So you can go to anchor.fm/I Just Have to Say. Or I just have to say lauramax.com and you can hear all my recent episodes, but you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to
Yeah,
podcasts. It's really everything. It's
it's really
society,
good.
culture, whatever's kind of going on at the moment. I'm
It's really
talking
good.
about.
And Laura, it's really good. And Laura, as you can tell, like you have, you just have a great podcasting voice. You have a great voice. I mean, I know you used to like host on TV, right? Didn't you
I
do a
did
variety
some
of,
I went to
yeah,
school for broadcasting.
right,
So,
right.
but I'm
She's very
surprised
good
you
at this.
didn't. Like, what didn't you like? Were you like a
I
fashion
wanted
major or
to,
something?
yeah, I was a fashion major and then I wanted to do broadcast journalism at some point and be an actress at some point, and none of that panned out, but we have a
You're
podcast that
doing
some people
exactly what
listen
you're
to.
supposed to be doing.
No,
Clearly,
I'm
you are
very,
so good at this.
well, you're very sweet, as are you. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. As always, you can follow me at by Julie Lauren on all social media channels. And please subscribe to my podcast. I'm now putting them on YouTube for my one subscriber, but please subscribe. And I just thank you so much for listening. It means so much to me. And I'll talk to you very, very soon. Bye-bye.